My name is Victor Erdahl. I'm an advanced EMT with Mercy Regional EMS out of Paducah, Kentucky, and I'm a firefighter with Concord Fire and Rescue. Now today we're going to be going over a blood pressure cuff and how it works. It's one of your primary tools when working in EMS. And if you don't know how a blood pressure cuff works, then you have no business putting that on a patient. This is one of the top tools to figuring out what could potentially be wrong with your patient, or whether or not they're in a life-threatening situation. So, we're going to start off by going through our reviews, by reviewing our objectives and goals. Now, by the time we're done with this, to keep it brief, you should be able to evaluate and defend the need to attain a blood pressure, and you should be able to comprehend the importance of identifying hypotension versus hypertension. And you should be capable of explaining a general idea on how blood pressure and attaining a blood pressure works. All right, so let's begin. We're going to do a little bit of anatomy overview, and we're going to figure out exactly what systolic and diastolic is. So the heart, as it's pushing blood out, goes through the aorta and then through the arteries. And that right there is where you get your systolic blood pressure. This is important because it's telling you how well that pump is working. So your systolic, that's that top number, is the pressure of the blood coming out of the heart. That diastolic, which is the return pressure, is the blood coming through the veins and returning to the heart. That's the leftover. All right? So, a blood pressure cuff is fully inflated. It's pressing off the artery, and it's essentially a tourniquet. So you see it right there where it's all squeezed off nice and flat. That's where we're going to start at. You start reducing that pressure. As you reduce that pressure, the artery opens up a little bit, and you're going to start hearing that heartbeat, or feeling it if you're palpating it. That's your systolic blood pressure, and that's your pressure pumping into the body. Now again, that's that top number, and that is where it's coming in to the arteries. Now after a while, you're going to release it, and you're going to hear that last little bit of thump, 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 and that last heartbeat, that spot where you hear that last heartbeat, is your diastolic pressure, and that is where the artery is most of the way open in your arm. And that diastolic pressure is the pressure pushing blood back to the heart through the veins. That's a diastolic, that's your bottom number. All right? If you're with me so far, you got an idea as to what it is. Now, what do these numbers mean? So, we need to be going over hypotension, where your blood pressure should be, and hypertension. So we're going to start at the very bottom. We're going to start with really bad hypotension. This is where your patient is already in shock, and they could be circling the drain ready to go into decompensated shock. So, we've got blood pressure systolic, 50 over 65, and diastolic at 35 over 45, or 35 to 45 according to the book. Now, reality, out in the field, you're not going to hear a diastolic blood pressure. So if you get a systolic of 50 or 65, you need to be going lights and sirens per your department's protocol. And you need to be doing something. See about a paramedic intercept if necessary. Now, going up, 70 to 85. Systolic, 50 to 55 diastolic. You're going to see some syncope and fainting, lightheadedness, and that right there, they don't need to be driving, they don't need to be operating any heavy machinery, they don't need to be handling firearms, they don't need to be drinking, they don't need to be out in the heat. They need to be probably laying flat, and of course getting to a hospital, which is where we come in as EMS providers. So, above that, you have your low normal. And that right there is about a systolic of a 90 to 100 and a diastolic of about 60 to 65. And you're seeing this, that's your athletes, that's your marathon runners, your track stars, that's that 16-year-old stud that's out playing baseball for his high school. That's a 12-year-old kid who really doesn't need that much pressure going through him anyways to get the blood returning back to the heart. Now above that, we have what I call the Goldilocks zone. That's not a medical term, that's my terminology. And your department may say something's different for what a blood pressure should be. This right here is what I would consider the normal range, and that's 105 systolic to 130 with a diastolic of 70 to 85. That's excellent. That's right where we want to be. Now we start going into hypertension, where it's a little bit too high, too high. Now we're going 135 to 145 systolic, 85 to 90 diastolic. That's your borderline hypertension. Borderline hypertension, that's your guy who just got off of that long shift on the ambulance. That's the guy who just got his butt chewed by the boss. He's got a whole bunch of reports left open. He's got to get knocked out. He's stressed. He's listening to those kids in the back seat after a long drive. Man, it sucks being here. Now, above that, we start to worry. That's 150 over 160 systolic, 95 to 100 diastolic. And that right there is your standard hypertension. At that point, you're going to start getting some mild headaches. You're going to see them going through a lot of stress. And this is where their doctor needs to be well aware. This is where it's still able to be reversed and hopefully through medical intervention brought back down to the Goldilocks zone by the patient's physician or an ER physician. Now, that can still be salvaged going above that, but hypertension right there, that 150, 160, that's where they still need to be going to the hospital, but you got time. Now, severe hypertension is 165 to 180 systolic, and 100 to 110 diastolic. That's severe hypertension. That's where you're going to start seeing those migraine headaches. You're going to start seeing those tension headaches. You're going to see some muscle cramping. It's not going to feel good for them. Your patient's going to be in a world of hurt. They're going to be fatigued. They're going to be hurt, just to say the least. But definitely look out for those headaches. Light sensitivity is another thing to look out for. So that severe hypertension, they could be heading towards heart attack and stroke zone. Now, as we go up, 185 to 230 systolic to 110 plus diastolic. It doesn't necessarily have to be the 110. It could be a diastolic of 95 or a diastolic of 85. But if that systolic blood pressure is reading 185 to 230, they need to be getting to a hospital, and per your department's protocol, probably lights and sirens. That's heart attack and stroke zone right there. That's bad. That's when you need to be looking at their face, getting the smile real big and hoping it's equal. Getting that grip strength, that face, arm, speech, and the time they were last seen normal. Now from there, now we've gone over what hypertension is. Let's take a look at the medicine list and see what would indicate a history of hypertension. Now, the easy way to remember this is A, B, C. ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, and your calcium channel blockers. Now, that list is not at all inclusive, but that covers a pretty good chunk of it. A little bit can go a long way. Now, if it's an ACE inhibitor, it's probably, not always, but probably going to end in PRIL, or P-R-I-L. A beta blocker is going to end in OLOL, or O-L-O-L. And a calcium channel blocker, again, not always, but quite often, ends in dipin, D-I-P-I-N, or dipine, D-I-P-I-N-E. Again, that's ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, and calcium channel blockers. Your A, B, and C, and those are prescribed by a doctor. Now, for the hypertensive patient, someone with permanent hypertension, that they may get some treatment with epinephrine from a physician or from a higher level of care. And another caveat to add for that hypertension is a patient that is coming off of dialysis. Usually they're going to be hypertensive once they're taken off of that dialysis machine. So if you're doing an interfacility transfer, taking somebody from dialysis back to the nursing home, you see that they're kind of hypertensive. That typically happens after dialysis treatment. So, now that we've gone over all of this, I'm going to introduce you to the tools of the trade. This is a stethoscope. Now with that stethoscope, where you place that bell is crucial. A lot of people will say to put it over the antecubital vein, but we're not going for a venal blood pressure. We are going for an arterial blood pressure. So we put that over the brachial artery. After that's over the brachial artery, you're going to listen for that top number, and you're going to listen for that last thump for your diastolic. Now, we break out the blood pressure cuff, or sphygmomanometer. I dare you to say that 3 times fast. So for this, it's going to have an artery line, and it's also going to have a dial that's going to indicate in millimeters over mercury what the blood pressure is reading currently. So, put it on there. We're going to line up that artery mark with your brachial artery. After that's lined up, and it doesn't have to be exact, it's like horseshoes and hand grenades. Close enough can work. Lock it off. And then we're going to pump it up. And if you're suspecting your patient has hypertension, or there's a good reason to suspect it, go ahead and pump that past 230. And then slowly let that off until you start hearing or palpating and feeling that pulse. Now, as that's going down, there we go. There's that shift on the ambulance a couple hours ago. That is about 130, 132 right there is what I'm palpating it as. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and listen for my diastolic. So, as I'm pushing that down and releasing that, arm is supposed to be relaxed. Clearly mine isn't, but this is a demonstration. I'm listening for that last little bit, and you'll see that needle jump just a bit on that last number. $84 diastolic. Now at that point, release off the rest of the pressure. Let that arm kind of catch its circulation again. You should be good to go. So now that we've gone over all of that, hopefully you've been taking notes, because now I've got a 5-question quiz for you. Best of luck to you.